Hey guys, Sean at Top 5 Fit. Trying to up the squat game, the leg work just a little bit. So what we're going to go into today is an overhead squat with an instability factor, and we'll show you how we're going to throw that in. I chose the overhead squat because it has kind of multiple roles as far as advancing you in your squat game. One of which is form. One of the big, I guess, restrictions that a lot of people run into when they start squatting or they want to be good at squatting is usually not their strength, believe it or not. It's more so their mobility. Just being able to maintain proper form while under that weight is a little bit more challenging than you realize. You'll see some of my own limitations as we move through. What we're going to start off with is, I guess, proper positioning for the first part of the exercise. Obviously, here in my facility, I've got a cage and a rack that I get in. Whatever you have access to, obviously, will work just fine. But I like to start the weight, or at least the Olympic bar, off at about shoulder height. It's just a good position to start from, and at the same time, you're not really putting yourself into a bad spot before you even begin the exercise. So make sure the bar is about shoulder width apart. You're just going to go ahead and step off. Now, for your foot position, I like to make sure that I'm about a little wider than shoulder width and slightly abducted, so toes are turned out just a hair. Almost sumo squat position. So before I do anything with the bar, I like to make sure that my feet are at least in that spot. Next, we're going to go ahead and get the bar into an overhead position. I like to make sure that the shoulders are slightly depressed and packed behind you. If they're the opposite way and slightly in front, you'll have a tendency to drop the bar, and that can obviously put undue stress on your low back. So you want to make sure that you're drawn, shoulder blades drawn together and depressed. Once we go into the squat, it's sit back and keep your head up as much as possible, chest up as well, and then draw your hips right back up underneath you. So you might be wondering why that looks so difficult, or at least why I'm making it look so difficult. It's one of the reasons why I actually chose this particular exercise to put in with the rest of my squat work. This particular exercise forces you to pay attention to your form. A lot of times people have a tendency to drop their chest in their squats. Their head is almost in a downward position, and ideally your chest is supposed to be up. You're also supposed to maintain a bit of a curve in your low back, which can be very challenging when you have a 45-pound Olympic bar above your head drawing you forward. So you actually have to forcibly contract your QL, your low back, while you're doing the squat, as well as recruit your glutes just to not fall. That's why they feel and look so challenging. But that's a reinforcement of form. That forces you to put your body into proper squat position, so when you go from 45 pounds to 600 pounds, you're not bursting discs and blowing up your vertebrae or creating some other kind of irreparable damage. The whole point is you need to move forward with these exercises and be improved by them, not necessarily injured every single time you attempt one. 45 pounds is challenging for my 44-year-old frame. And I want to keep doing them, so the idea is I'm going to stick with the 45-pound bar for a while. This will also benefit anything I do squat-wise in the front or in the back, because now I don't have to worry about my arms being above my head, and it's easier to maintain the form. The challenge is keeping that bar above your head and keeping your chest up and that curve in your back at the same time. In the interest of trying not to injure people, we have to talk about progression just a little bit. Now, obviously, if this is resting on the traps or positioned in a front squat, 45 pounds is not going to challenge you that much. The minute you put it over top of your head, gravity starts playing some games with you. So in the beginning, a broomstick would work just fine because, again, working form is first and foremost. I went straight to the 45-pound bar because it's just what I use in here. But you can see just by the grimace on my face that ultimately this is still a challenging exercise. But when you are trying to creep your numbers up in your squat, when you're trying to actually get some positive leg gains, you want to make sure you're doing it right. I've come across a lot of people with some pretty nasty low back and leg injuries in general just because their form was off. So pay attention to what you're doing and make sure you're incorporating activities that are forcing clean form. They are putting you into a position to where you're going to be nice and stable up underneath that load. Stable brings me to my next topic, making this an unstable activity. Now, where exactly is this going to be, where can you apply that kind of work? If you're an MMA guy, at some point you might take somebody over top of your head, and 9 times out of 10, they're not going to sit still while you do it. So if you're a power lifter and you decide to pull all the way above your head, if that weight decides to shift backwards for any reason, you're going to have to pull it back into place over top of your head. And again, if you are somebody just trying to improve your squat, it's going to force your form. So it has crossover, and that's something I tend to look at in most exercises that I want to put in my own regimen. I need to be able to get multiple returns on that one exercise. So adding an instability exercise or component to this exercise, we're going to need 2 number 1 bands, and I'll show you how to fold them and put them on the end and what weight to use. All right, adding an instability factor to this exercise. We're going to use some number 1 bands. What you want to do to start off with is just kind of fold in half. All right, this is some of that band voodoo that people don't always understand. But basically what you want to do is just fold it in half, and you'll see 2 loops hanging there. Take your finger and go right between those loops, and you've got a grouping. There should be 4 straps in there. That gives you at least enough stability, and you're not worried about the plate falling. You're going to take one end and run it right through the center of the plate. This is a 5-pound plate because, again, I'm not trying to blow my shoulders out or my back, so we're only going to take the grand total of 45 pounds up to 55 pounds. Take the loops, place them right on the end. And now you've got the plate actually hanging. It can swing forward, it can swing back, side to side. This gives us that factor of instability, which ultimately is going to challenge a lot of your secondary and stabilization tissue. Let's do the same thing on the opposite side. Fold it in half, grab the loops, take your plate, take the one side all the way through. Place, and now we're balanced. I mean, I eyeball this. This isn't necessarily something that I measure out completely, and that's something I get yelled at a lot about, not measuring. But ultimately, as long as you know that you're somewhere in between, the neck of the collar and the end, you're fine. So we'll go ahead and get back into position. Step up under the weight. Now, as you can see already, as I unload the bar, the plates are swinging. So as soon as I get into position, my core actually has to fire and stabilize just to keep me under the bar. I'm going to go ahead and extend that bar up and overhead, open my feet up, nice and wide, toes out, sit the butt back, nice and deep, stand it right back up. All right, a couple of things you want to pay attention to when you're doing this. One, and was an interesting point that was brought up earlier, you really have to make sure you do this exercise correctly, because the minute you don't, things go badly fast. So one thing to pay attention to, obviously, is the position of the bar. You really want to try and make sure and keep it over top of your head throughout the entire movement. Too much forward, the bar comes crashing down to the ground, usually drags you with it. Too far back, same thing, it'll pull you right to the ground. So really focus on keeping that bar right over top of your head. And the instability factor, adding the plates on the side, you might want to wait until you're comfortable enough with a 45-pound bar before throwing that on there. That kind of adds a second element as to how much you're using your core and your glutes and your hips, how stable you are on the floor. So you're adding a lot of challenge factors into the one exercise just by putting those on. So following proper progression, make sure you're comfortable with the bar before you throw that in there. Lower back position is also very important. You want to make sure you really focus on maintaining that arch. The minute you drop your chest and start to flatten out in the low back, you're now treating your low back like a lever, and all of the weight that's over your head is now focusing on your low back, and that's an easy way to create an injury. Outside of that, foot placement, Again, it's pretty much a sumo squat. You do want to make sure that you're not too narrow with this. So wider is genuinely a little bit better when it comes to this particular exercise. Not saying that squatting narrow is a bad thing, but when you've got the bar over top of your head, you want as much movement and release in the hips and pelvis as you can get, and the wider stance tends to offer you that. Hey guys, thanks again for watching. That wraps it up for the overhead squat with the instability factor thrown in. If you find the information useful or it's helping out, please make sure and give us a like. If you got anything you'd like us to go over, don't be afraid to leave it in the comment box below, and make sure to subscribe and check out our new videos. Thanks again.